You thought they were innocent. A horseshoe above the door, a mirror by the bedside, a broom in the corner. But many of the objects we keep in our homes have far stranger, darker roots. Some were protective, some were powerful, and some were pulled from the realm of the dead. From iron to glass, salt to thread, these are the sinister origins of everyday household items. Welcome back, Lightlings. We all remember the comfort of home from childhood. The familiar creak of floorboards, the soft glow of lamplight, the scent of something cooking in the kitchen, and hanging above the front door, a simple horseshoe, curved metal catching the light. For generations, it's been a symbol of good luck, protection for the home and family. But this particular household charm has a surprisingly ancient and bloody past. The Greeks and Romans believed iron could repel evil spirits, as metal was thought to be anathema to supernatural forces. But the horseshoe's power came not just from its iron, but from its association with horses, creatures of war, death, and sacrifice. In ancient Celtic tradition, horses were sacred animals, often buried with their riders or sacrificed to appease the gods. The horseshoe, having touched the hooves of these magical beasts, was thought to carry their otherworldly power. But perhaps its most devoted believers were the medieval Christians, who saw the horseshoe as a crescent moon turned upside down, a symbol of the defeat of pagan goddess worship. They wrote that it must be hung with the opening upward, to catch and hold good fortune. But older traditions insisted the opposite, opening downward to pour blessings upon all who passed beneath. 1,000 years ago, that iron curve above your door was seen not just as decoration, but as a battle standard in the war between good and evil. It's remarkable that a medieval blacksmith's creation reflects the very same protective instincts our grandmothers held hundreds of years later. But not all homes were protected by iron alone. In 18th century folk belief, particularly among rural families and isolated communities, a far more unsettling guardian was sometimes employed. A witch bottle, hidden beneath the threshold or buried in the garden. The unfortunate container would be filled with the homeowner's own urine, hair, nail clippings, and pins or nails, then sealed and concealed. One colonial account from Massachusetts recalls a woman instructing this very practice, claiming, "The darker the bottle, the stronger the protection." The personal items were believed to create a sympathetic link between the bottle and its maker, while the sharp objects would torment any witch who tried to cast spells upon the household. The urine, meanwhile, would force the witch to feel the homeowner's pain instead of inflicting it. But witch bottles weren't just protective, they were weapons. To create one was to declare war on the invisible forces that threatened your family. So the next time you see a horseshoe hanging above a door with a knowing smile, remember that protection in your home could just as easily have come from a much darker practice. But if the horseshoe didn't work, there was always salt. That white, crystalline substance sprinkled on food, scattered on icy steps, kept in small dishes by the stove. But salt is no ordinary seasoning. It's one of the oldest protective substances we know. In ancient Rome, salt was literally money. The word salary comes from the Latin salarium, the payment given to soldiers to buy salt. But beyond its economic value, salt held spiritual power. Roman generals would scatter salt on conquered lands to ensure nothing would grow there again, a practice so thorough it gave us the phrase, salting the earth. In medieval texts, salt appears again and again as a barrier against evil. Holy water was always mixed with blessed salt. Circles of salt were drawn around the beds of the sick to keep demons at bay. The substance's preservation properties were understood long before refrigeration. What could preserve meat could surely preserve souls, but not always in the way you'd expect. In a 12th century grimoire known as the Sworn Book of Honorius, we find a different sort of protective ritual. The practitioner is instructed to take salt that has been blessed by a priest, mix it with the ashes of a burned crucifix, and scatter it in the four corners of their home while reciting specific incantations. This wasn't just protection, it was consecration, turning the entire house into a fortress against the supernatural. So while your grandmother may have reached for salt to season her cooking, carefully measured and sprinkled with care, in another age that same salt might have been mixed with sacred ash and scattered in corners, whispered over and left to guard against the darkness within. But the protection of salt pales in comparison to the power of reflection. And so from a bedroom wall or a hallway corner, there gazes back a guardian older than superstition itself. The mirror. Its silvered surface, its perfect reflection familiar in every home across the world. In ancient China and Egypt, mirrors were made of polished metal and were considered windows to the soul. The Egyptians buried mirrors with the dead, believing they would need to see their reflection in the afterlife to maintain their identity. But interestingly, they also believed mirrors could trap spirits, which is why they were often covered or turned to face the wall when someone died. By the medieval period, mirrors had become tools of divination and magic. The 13th century scholar Albertus Magnus wrote extensively about mirror magic, claiming that polished surfaces could reveal hidden truths and future events. But mirrors weren't just for seeing, they were for hiding. In centuries past, when death crossed into the realm of the supernatural, and when the recently deceased were feared not just as memories but as potential visitors, mirrors became weapons in the battle between worlds. One folk belief passed through parts of Europe and colonial America suggested that mirrors should be covered. The silvered surface was thought to confuse the departing soul, causing it to become lost between reflections instead of moving on to the afterlife. In some cases, the mirrors weren't merely covered, they were shattered, their fragments buried in consecrated ground, their reflective power broken forever. So while your bathroom mirror shows you your morning face, in another time that same reflection might have been shrouded in black cloth, hidden away to prevent the dead from finding their way back through the looking glass. From the ethereal realm of mirrors to the practical world of cleaning, there's another household item with surprisingly dark origins. The broom. Humble, practical, found in every home, but in centuries past, it was far more than a cleaning tool. In ancient Rome, midwives would sweep the threshold of a home where a birth had occurred, not to clean, but to protect. The sweeping motion was believed to brush away any evil spirits that might harm the newborn. Pliny the Elder, writing in the 1st century AD, noted that brooms made from birch twigs were particularly effective for this purpose. But the broom's most famous association came much later. In medieval Europe, brooms became inextricably linked with witchcraft. The witch's broomstick wasn't just a tool of flight, it was a symbol of domestic power turned dangerous. The act of sweeping, so associated with women's work, became a metaphor for the witch's ability to sweep away her enemies. But here's where it gets darker. In some European traditions, brooms were made from the wood of gallows trees, trees from which criminals had been hanged. The belief was that wood touched by death held special power. These gallows brooms were thought to be particularly effective at sweeping away not just dirt, but curses, hexes, and malevolent spirits. So while you may reach for your broom to tidy up, in another village, another century, someone was crafting theirs from the timber of the condemned, believing that death's touch would make their cleaning truly supernatural. And if that image of gallows wood leaves you feeling uneasy, you might seek comfort in another household staple that seems perfectly innocent. Candles, their warm glow, their dancing flames, their pools of melted wax creating atmosphere in every room. But candles have always been more than light sources. In ancient times, they were offerings to the gods, their flames carrying prayers skyward. Roman households kept small shrines with perpetual flames, believing that as long as the fire burned, the family would be protected. But not all candles brought comfort. In medieval grimoires, we find recipes for corpse candles, candles made from the fat of executed criminals or those who had died violent deaths. These macabre lights were believed to reveal hidden treasures, expose thieves, or even communicate with the dead. The process was revolting but precise. Fat was rendered from a hanged man's body, mixed with virgin wax, and formed into candles that would burn with an unnatural blue flame. These weren't just sources of light. They were necromantic tools, their very existence a violation of the natural order. Even more disturbing were the hand of glory candles, made from the severed hand of a hanged thief, each finger serving as a wick. These ghastly candelabras were said to render sleeping victims unconscious, allowing burglars to work undetected. So while your evening might be lit by the soft glow of store-bought candles, in another era, that same light might have come from the rendered fat of the executed, burning with otherworldly fire to reveal secrets better left hidden. From the realm of light to the world of thread, there's one more household item with surprisingly sinister origins. Thread and needle, found in every sewing basket, used to mend and create. But in folk magic, thread was a tool of binding, controlling, and cursing. In ancient Greece and Rome, thread was associated with the Fates, the three sisters who spun, measured, and cut the thread of human life. To manipulate thread was to manipulate destiny itself, but thread magic wasn't always benevolent. The practice of binding, using thread to tie knots while concentrating on a specific person, was believed to give the practitioner power over their target. Each knot was tied with intention, to bind someone's tongue so they couldn't speak against you, to bind their feet so they couldn't run away, to bind their heart so they would love you. But the darkest use of thread came in the form of poppets, small dolls made from fabric and stuffed with personal items from the intended victim. Threads from the victim's clothing, strands of their hair, even dirt from their footprints would be sewn into these cloth figures. The poppet would then be pierced with pins, burned, or buried, with the belief that whatever happened to the doll would happen to the person it represented. In 17th century England, possession of a poppet was considered evidence of witchcraft, punishable by death. The thread that bound these dolls was seen as binding the souls of the innocent to the will of the witch. So while your sewing basket might contain harmless thread for mending clothes, in another time, that same thread might have been used to bind the fate of enemies, knotted with malice and sewn with the intent to harm. These objects that surround us in our daily lives, the horseshoe, the salt, the mirror, the broom, the candle, the thread, they're all remnants of a time when the line between the mundane and the magical was razor thin. When protection and power could be found in the most ordinary things, and when the darkness was always just one ritual away. The next time you walk through your home, look around with new eyes. That innocent horseshoe might once have been a battle standard. That simple mirror might have been a trap for souls. That humble broom might have been carved from a gallows tree. And that peaceful candle might have been made from the fat of the condemned. Our homes are filled with guardians and weapons, protectors and tools of power. We've simply forgotten how to see them for what they truly are. But now you know. Now you can never look at your household items the same way again. Sweet dreams, lightlings, and remember, you're never truly alone in your home. The objects around you carry the weight of centuries, the power of protection, and sometimes the whisper of something far more sinister than you ever imagined.